welcome to Season 2, Episode 2 of Upstate and Litigate. I'm Derek Spada, a partner at Bosch and Keegan.
I'm John DeGaspers, also a partner at Bosch and Keegan. Welcome to another episode. Today, we are going to talk about one of my favorite case types, and that's product liability.
We're going to cover what it means and why it matters.
I think product liability cases are very important to society as a whole. My feeling is that these types of cases actually make the world a safer place. It is through these types of cases where manufacturers of goods and products learn that they can't cut corners, that profit is not the only motivation, and that consumer safety is vital to the world economy.
These cases hold corporations accountable if they make a product to maximize their profit and they cut corners, as John said. If they cut corners here and there, put a product out there that hurts somebody, then they're on the hook for it, is what it boils down to.
I think another really interesting thing about product liability law is that the term product covers a wide array of goods, equipment, consumables. You'll see product liability cases in things like hair products, medical devices, vehicles, smoking apparatuses like Juul and things like that. Food. We've done household appliances, bicycles, motorcycles, scooters. The list goes on and on. I had that huge manufacturer device, that big baler. And so, I think that people should be aware that you can be the victim of a product defect virtually any day of the week, doing anything, anywhere. Didn't you have one with a seatbelt?
I did, yeah.
So I think product liability cases are really interesting in that they can affect all different types of people, old and young, the working class, non-working class, patients of medical facilities and things like that. One of the other things that I think is really interesting about handling product liability cases is the interactions that the lawyers get to have with experts in the respective fields. I think that that's one of the most fascinating things, to talk to the people who are experts in what they do. We're experts in trial lawyering and being getting cases through the courthouse. But when you talk to these nerds, these metallurgists and engineers and things like that, I think it's really cool.
And to take a case like this from start to finish, I think you as the attorney have to become an expert in that product.
Have to.
There's no way around that. So you have to hire an expert, of course, who knows about the product or that general field. But you yourself have to really dig into it and learn a whole series of facts and knowledge about something that you probably knew nothing about before.
And it also, to Derek's point, I think that this is one of those situations where you really want to find a lawyer who is experienced in handling product liability cases. These cases are generally complex, not only in the science that is involved, but also the litigation itself is, I think, very complicated and intensive. The litigation can be intense. These cases tend to be more expensive because you have to engage experts, and typically you have to engage a number of experts. So, for example, in a car crash case, basic rear-end car crash, you might just need one medical expert. But when it comes to product liability, you generally need experts in the science that is at issue. Then you also need your medical experts, sometimes economists and things like that. So you certainly want to pick a lawyer who is experienced with product liability law. Mm-hmm. Now, Derek, you do see trends across the nation, even globally, in class action lawsuits involving product liability. You have the talc powder case against Johnson & Johnson. We were involved in the CPAP cases against Philips. There's, you've seen major auto manufacturers involved in product liability cases. What's your take on product liability and why we see them in the context of class action litigation?
I'll say there's different types of defects in products, but if there's a mass-produced product, there's millions of them out there, and if there's a defect in those products, it's probably going to harm at least thousands of people, and maybe even tens of thousands of people. And so then we have that many people who are who are harmed or injured due to a product, well, a few will come forward. It's like a trickle. So like a couple come forward here and there, but then soon enough, people begin to realize that there's lots of these claims, and then law firms go through the process of forming a class and try to get as big of a class as they can, try to collect all the people who are injured and who are part of that class to then pursue the manufacturer or whoever is responsible for the defect in the product.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I've learned after handling several product liability cases is that the one-off accident caused by a product, that like once in a blue moon situation, those are not easy cases because there's no notice to the manufacturer. And while notice is not necessarily a prerequisite to product liability cases, it's a much better case when you can go to the manufacturer and say, you knew that this was an issue. You continued to produce this product. You had a sense that it was defective. You had received innumerable complaints. You knew that people were complaining about illness, whatever it may be. And nonetheless, you didn't make any changes. You just wanted to produce this cheap product. Those are better cases. So I think that is why you've seen this movement toward product liability cases being litigated in a mass tort context.
Yeah, we also have to prove that the product left the manufacturer already in a defective state and that it wasn't altered afterwards or misused,
right.
Something along those lines, which is why sometimes if you come across an older product, something that was manufactured like 10, 20, 30 years ago, those are tougher cases.
Sure.
But they're still winnable. Like that Baylor case that you had, that machine was fairly old, I believe.
It was 30 years old.
It was 30 years old, but you still won the case because there was still a way to prove that it was dangerous and defective when it left the manufacturer.
Right. And that machine had injured people before, but not in the same way. So that was a challenging case. They took us to trial and we won. I think a little history here is important because if you think about how product liability started and where we are now, like we were just talking about mass torts, you used to, you would go to the local tractor dealer or manufacturer. If you were a farmer and you needed a tractor, you'd order the thing and you'd get a tractor, and then the manufacturer wouldn't make another one until somebody else needed one. And so you used to generally, I think product liability cases, it started where your victim would go right back to the manufacturer. But now we have a global economy, right? So many household goods and like appliances and cosmetics even, toiletries, they are created maybe overseas. And so now it's much harder for the average consumer to go find the actual manufacturer. So you've seen this reform in the law now where you can sue anyone in the supply chain. And like I know, like you've handled cases against Walmart, even though Walmart doesn't make those goods. And so maybe you should just talk to our listeners a little bit about how and why you can sue the retailer, for example, in a product liability case, even though that product did not get made in that store.
Sure. So if you buy a product in a store, well, you really have no idea where it was actually made. Like it might say made in China or made in India or whatever, but you don't really know who the manufacturer actually is in that foreign country most of the time. And so if you take the product home and then you're injured due to a defect in the product, you just have no way to figure out who to sue in China, and you shouldn't have to go to China or wherever to find this corporation and sue them in that country or try to get them to come to this country for the lawsuit. So there's this chain of, of control of the product or distribution of the product. So if you sue the local store where you bought it, then the concept is they're supposed to go back in the chain and sue the other company that they bought it from. Usually there's a whole chain of companies that lead back to the manufacturer, and every company that moved this product from one company to the next should have a contract in place to get paid back from the final store that pays the consumer who was injured. So the money flows through a chain ultimately. So it does all fall back on the manufacturer. It just takes a lot of steps. It's a long process.
Sure, right. And there's good public policy here too, right? So first of all, again, this is the advent of the global economy because you can't go back to the tractor dealer anymore because the tractor was made somewhere else far away. But the public policy here also is, we see major retailers, major corporations putting so many different goods into the economy and thus affecting a lot of people, unwitting consumers. And so it is good public policy, in my opinion, corporate America would disagree, that we hold the retailers accountable because, listen, Walmart knows if that product is dangerous, right? Walmart usually look into these things. How was it made? Is it going to hurt people? What is the likelihood it's going to hurt people? And how much money are we going to make? And is it worth selling? They should know. If you go to CVS and you buy a hair product, CVS is distributing these products across the nation, at least, if not the globe. CVS has a duty to the consumer to keep them safe and to know, hey, we're putting a crappy product out into the world, and that's why you can hold them accountable. Because CVS and its buying power, Walmart and its buying power, should be able to influence the way that these manufacturers make products. And here, we're going to hold these major corporations accountable because they can help us make the world safer by selling good products and holding their suppliers and manufacturers accountable as well.
And I'll say if you're injured by a product, the single most important thing to do is to preserve the product.
Preserve the product.
So then if you're injured by something and the product is like self-destructs or breaks in the process, you might be inclined to say, well, it's broken, and you might just throw it out. And then later on when you try to have a case, you have no product, so it's almost impossible to win the case.
Right, because in product liability cases, guess what everybody wants to do? They want to see the product, right? Yeah. So we can go buy a new one of the thing, but that's not the thing that broke. That's just like a model. So Derek is absolutely right. You should save the product. I'll give you a crazy example. I have a case right now against a major medical manufacturer. I'm not going to name them because I might be under some confidentiality agreement. We know how that goes, Derek. So, but what's interesting is this individual had a hip surgery. The hip prosthesis failed, so it had to come out. They called and they said they explained the story, and I'm like, okay, well, that's really interesting. It doesn't seem like the prosthesis should just snap in half like that while it's inside your body. No chance you have it, right? And the client said, yeah, I have it. So imagine this, like this prosthesis comes out of his hip after being inside of his body for 9 months, and he had the wherewithal to tell his doctor to save it.
Yeah.
So went to pathology after it was removed from his body. Pathology looked at it, put it in a plastic Chinese food container, and the patient left the hospital with it. And so we had it. We ultimately turned it over to a metallurgist in a major lab out in California. We had it to look at. The manufacturer took it for a little while. It was really interesting. But Derek, to this point about saving the dangerous product, the case that we tried down in Orange County with the manufacturing machine, or I think the right term would be an industrial machine, a large machine. That person was hurt at a manufacturing facility, gets carted out in an ambulance. His injuries are so awful that he never goes back to work. He doesn't have the machine, right? It's not his to keep. So do you recall, like, what would you do in that situation? I remember what I did to preserve the evidence, but like, what could we do in that situation if you don't have the ability to save the product because it wasn't yours, or it's not a consumable, it's not small?
What you should do is call a lawyer as soon as possible.
Yes.
And ask them to investigate it, get photos and videos of the machine, ask the owner of the machine to save it as is if they're able to do that. That's really like all you can do, but I would say make every effort possible to preserve the object that caused the injury, or ask someone else to preserve it for you.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. If you're involved in a product liability case, you should always preserve the product if you can. But sometimes you can't. Maybe it's a major industrial machine that's in a manufacturing facility that you don't own or operate. Maybe it's a vehicle that you were a passenger in, or maybe it was your vehicle, but you're so catastrophically injured, you can't go save the car. Derek's right. The first thing you should do is call a lawyer, because the lawyer will investigate the case and put resources into that investigation. If you have major injuries or losses due to a product defect, such as a vehicle failure of some sort, we as lawyers, we can do something called pre-litigation discovery. In other words, we could run to the courthouse and we could tell the judge, we think we have a case, but we don't know, so we don't feel good about suing somebody, but we need the ability to go into the facility that isn't ours, or we need to go to the towing yard to get that car, or we need the police to hold the thing, whatever it may be. And the judge will empower us to go do your investigation to learn if you have a case. I just settled a case for $800,000 against a major auto manufacturer. My client did not own the vehicle that we alleged was defective. He was he was burned head to toe. He was in a medical facility for 3 months after the crash. What did we do? We sent accident reconstructionists to the field. We sent investigators to go retain the vehicle. Remember, we bought a garage to park this shell of a vehicle in for many, many months at our expense. We send tow companies to get it. We will put resources into that case to win and preserve the integrity of the evidence, which Derek is right. It's critical to win that case. All right. So we talked a lot about product liability cases. I think you and I are both super critical, or I don't know if critical is the right word, cynical of these cases when they come through the door.
Yeah, they're fairly rare cases. You get a couple per year, I think, for each of us, somewhere about there, maybe 1 or 2, 3 per year for each lawyer at our firm. So they're fairly rare cases, and there's different types of defects that you have to look for. Mm-hmm. So one could be in the design, maybe it just wasn't designed properly, or maybe there was an issue with the manufacturer of this particular item. Right. So it might be a perfectly good item, right, but something went wrong in the manufacturing process that makes the one that injured you defective.
Right. The way they put it together.
Yeah. There's other possibilities too, other ways to have product cases, but those are the most common.
Failure to warn. Sometimes you have a product that maybe it's not a bad product in and of itself, right? Like chainsaws. I mean, they're highly effective, but they're incredibly dangerous. And so, sometimes there should be certain warnings that go along with a product that is like good for the world. It does a good job at what it does, but we should tell people, hey, if you hit that button, you might lose your finger, right? And so failure to warn is a huge element of product liability cases. That's why there's the big instructions and warnings on all these dangerous things, because again, the manufacturers of these products, the suppliers, the retailers, they know the hidden dangers, right? They know that if you hit that button, you're going to lose your finger. So now we have to tell the world about that. And I love that argument because I think that you could always argue like, hey, the accident happened. Your warning sucked, right?
It goes back to the Baylor case that you mentioned. There was no warning on the machine that it was the door swung open. It was a metal door that swung open spontaneously with a lot of power, but there was no warning on it that said stand clear of the door, for example, or don't stand within 2 feet or 3 feet of the door.
Yeah, and in that case, if that's a really good example, the manufacturer is like, dude, why would you walk in front of the door? And it's like, no, hold on. These are men and women at work. Right? They are like trying to troubleshoot, trying to get the job done. It's not their headache. Like they shouldn't be the ones burdened with understanding the dynamics. If you hit this button, the door is going to pop open. And so that's a good example, but they always push back because they never want to take responsibility for anything. And so that's how we got around that angle. The other thing on product liability cases is that and I think it goes back to the mass tort thing. I think they're really exciting because you never know as a lawyer when that product case comes into your office, you could find the next mass tort. You may be the first lawyer to find that prosthetic has a design defect or that car has an ignition switch problem. You may be the lawyer who will then take the crusade on against these major companies. Think about what's the new movie out there, Blackwater or whatever, with the Teflon in the pans and the household items. Until that one farmer said, "Oh, my cows are dying," no one knew. The company knew. They didn't give a shit. They kept putting it out there. But it took the first lawyer to realize, oh, this material is killing people across the world. And so that's what I think is really exciting. But otherwise, product liability, it's a real thing. If you think you have a case, call a lawyer, because you might be able to make a profound impact on the way that business is done going forward and just consumer safety as a whole. Save the evidence. Get a lawyer, somebody who's willing to invest in your case and your cause.
Thanks for watching our episode on product liability. I'm Derek Spada from Bosch and Keegan. If you have any questions, always feel free to reach out to us.
And I'm John DeGaspers. Thanks again for watching. If you like our videos, please consider subscribing to our channel, like this video, and we look forward to seeing you next time on another episode of Upstate and Litigate.